There is a special kind of exhaustion that settles onto a person's shoulders after a long flight with a sleeping child. It is not only physical fatigue, though there is plenty of that too, the stiffness from holding a small body still for hours, the dull ache crawling from the neck down the spine. It is something else as well. It is tenderness mixed with constant alertness, the kind that refuses to switch off even when the whole world seems to suggest that it is finally safe to relax. That was the particular weariness Nathan Whitmore carried with him as he walked through the revolving doors of the Ashford Grand Hotel on a Thursday evening in early November. His daughter, Lily, was asleep against his shoulder. In his free hand, he carefully held a small bouquet of red roses, gripping the stems low so the petals would not brush against her sleeping face. He had bought the flowers at the airport in the final minutes before boarding, because the next day marked the anniversary of his wife's death. Somewhere over Ohio, he had decided that he would not allow that day to arrive without flowers in the room. Some traditions survive grief through nothing but stubborn love. This was one of them. He moved toward the front desk slowly, stepping with the careful caution every parent learns when waking a child is the one thing in the world they are trying hardest to avoid. Nathan Whitmore was 40 years old. His dark hair was slightly unruly, the kind no professional haircut had ever managed to fully control, and his beard looked less like a deliberate style than the result of several long days on the road. He wore a brown leather jacket, soft and worn at the elbows, the sort of jacket that earns its character over years instead of arriving with it from a store. A leather messenger bag hung across his shoulder, heavy with the specific chaos that follows travel with a young child. Snacks, a tablet, a spare outfit, and a stuffed bear whose one ear had been loved a little more than the other. Lily, 6 years old, slept against him with the complete and defenseless trust children carry before the world teaches them to be careful. Her pink coat had wrinkled during the flight. The dark hair that had been braided into two neat pigtails that morning had half come loose on one side. One arm hung loosely around her stuffed bear, while her small hand rested against the leather of her father's jacket. To anyone watching from across the lobby, they would have looked exactly like what they were: a tired father traveling alone with his little girl, arriving late somewhere unfamiliar, wanting nothing more complicated than a bed. What the lobby did not know, and what Nathan had no particular reason to announce because announcing it had never been the point, was that the building they were standing in belonged to him. The Ashford Grand was the seventh property in a small, carefully built hotel group Nathan had founded 11 years earlier, before Lily was born, before his wife Grace became ill, before the world rearranged itself into the shape it had now. He did not run the daily operations of any single hotel. He had people for that: regional supervisors, general managers, and a small executive team that handled what needed to be handled. But he had made one quiet, unannounced rule for himself. From time to time, he visited his own properties without being recognized, dressed exactly as he was now. It was not meant to be a trap. It was not an inspection in the formal sense. It was simply because, over the years, he had learned that the only real way to understand how a place treats people is to be mistaken for an ordinary person. He reached the front desk. Behind it stood two women. The first was tall and blonde, her hair twisted into a neat low bun, her navy blazer sharp against a brass name tag that read Ashley. Her hands were folded loosely in front of her, and her eyes moved over Nathan in one quick measuring sweep: the worn leather jacket, the sleeping child, the bouquet of roses. She seemed to reach her conclusion before he had said a single word. Beside her stood another woman in a cream blazer, her dark hair falling over her shoulders. Her name tag read Morgan. Her arms were crossed as well, and her expression mirrored her co-workers. It was not openly hostile, exactly. It was guarded, as if she had already decided what kind of evening this was going to be. "Good evening," Nathan said quietly, careful not to raise his voice and wake Lily. "I have a reservation under Whitmore. Just checking in for the night." Ashley turned to the computer screen, then looked back at him. "I'm not seeing a reservation under that name," she said. "It should be there," Nathan replied. "It may have been booked through the corporate office. Could you check once more, please?" There was a pause. It was the particular kind of pause that comes from someone deciding how much effort a request deserves before the request has even been fully heard. "Sir," Ashley said, "even if there were a problem with the reservation, we are fully booked tonight. There is a corporate event upstairs, and I'm afraid we do not have anything available." Nathan shifted Lily gently, trying not to disturb her. "I understand that you're busy," he said, "but I would really appreciate it if you could look a little more carefully. It was a long flight, and my daughter needs to sleep somewhere other than an airport chair." That was the sort of moment that reveals something real about a person. Not because the words themselves are dramatic, but because of the small choices made in an unguarded instant, the tone chosen, the effort offered, the willingness or unwillingness to simply look again. Ashley glanced at Morgan. Something passed between them, unspoken but understood. That is how unkindness sometimes travels between people. It does not always need words. I truly am sorry, Ashley said in a tone that carried no sorrow at all, but there is nothing we can do. You might try the Marston in 2 blocks away. Morgan added, casually but coldly, sometimes, this time of year, it is difficult to find a room without a confirmed reservation. I would recommend calling ahead next time. Nathan stood there for another moment. He was not angry yet. Not in the way the situation might have invited him to be. He had built much of his career on a simple principle he had learned long before he owned a single building. You can learn far more about someone's character by watching how they treat a person who appears to have nothing to offer them than by watching how they treat someone who clearly has power. At that moment, he was simply a tired man in a worn jacket, holding a sleeping daughter and a bouquet of roses. To Ashley and Morgan, that seemed to be all he was. He shifted Lily's weight again. She stirred slightly, murmured something into his shoulder, then slipped back into sleep. May I speak with a manager? He asked softly. The manager is currently busy with the event upstairs, Ashley said. I really can't disturb him over a room availability issue. As I already explained, we are fully booked. It was then, while Nathan quietly considered his next move, that a third person stepped through a side door near the concierge desk. She was in her early 50s, with kind eyes and dark hair streaked with silver, pulled simply back. She wore the burgundy vest of the hotel's senior housekeeping staff. Her name tag read Rosa. She had been passing by with an armful of fresh linens when she noticed the scene at the front desk: the sleeping child, the roses, the tired angle of the father's shoulders, and the stiff body language of the 2 women behind the counter. Rosa set the linens down on a nearby luggage cart and walked over. Excuse me, she said gently, speaking to Nathan rather than to her co-workers. Is everything all right? Nathan looked at her. There was something open in her face, a patient attentiveness that had been entirely missing from the desk in front of him. I have a reservation that doesn't seem to be coming up, he said. And I'm being told the hotel is completely full. Rosa glanced at the front desk computer, then at Ashley. Did you check the corporate block? She asked. Sometimes reservations made through the executive office don't show in the standard search. You have to look under the secondary tab. Ashley's face tightened with irritation that she quickly tried to hide. I checked the system, she said. There's nothing. Did you check the secondary tab? Rosa repeated, this time more firmly. The softness in her voice did not disappear, but beneath it there was suddenly a clear line of steel. There was a pause. Ashley, with obvious reluctance, clicked through the screen. A moment later, her expression changed. There is a reservation here, she said slowly. Whitmore, under executive bookings. That's what I thought, Rosa said simply. But Rosa was not finished. She turned and truly looked at Nathan, the way she had apparently taught herself to look at every person who came through the doors of the place where she worked. Then she noticed the roses. They're beautiful, she said quietly. Is tomorrow a special day? Nathan looked down at the flowers in his hand. They were slightly crushed from the long flight, but the color had held. It's the anniversary, he said softly. My wife's. She passed away 3 years ago tomorrow. He stopped for a moment, adjusting Lily against his shoulder. We always put out flowers. It became our tradition. Rosa's expression softened in a way that had nothing to do with procedure or hotel policy. I'm so sorry, she said. Then she looked at Lily's sleeping face pressed against her father's shoulder, at the small hand curled around the worn stuffed bear. She's beautiful, Rosa said. Poor little thing looks completely worn out. It's been a long day for both of us, Nathan admitted. Rosa looked again at the bouquet. Then, very carefully, she reached out, asking permission with her eyes before her hand moved. She straightened one rose stem that had bent awkwardly during the flight. It was the kind of gesture a person makes when they notice a small thing that needs fixing and is simply the sort of person who fixes small things without waiting to be asked. Let me find you a vase before you go upstairs, she said. You shouldn't have to carry them all bent like that up to your room. It was a small gesture. It would not make the news. It would not have seemed remarkable in almost any other setting. But Nathan Whitmore, who had spent 11 years building a company around the belief that hospitality was not a department but a character trait, and that it could not be taught to someone who lacked the instinct entirely, felt something in his chest ease for the first time since he had walked through the revolving doors. Someone had finally seen him. Not the reservation. Not the inconvenience of a late check-in. Him. A tired, grieving father traveling alone with his daughter, carrying roses for a wife who was no longer there to receive them. "Thank you," he said. "That is very kind." "It's nothing," Rosa replied, already turning toward the concierge desk to find a vase. "It is the least this place can do after making you stand here this long." She said the last sentence loudly enough for Ashley and Morgan to hear every word. What happened next unfolded the way such things sometimes do, not through anger, but through simple, unavoidable clarity. Nathan checked in. Once the reservation was properly located, it confirmed a suite on the 9th floor, booked weeks earlier through his own corporate office. It was the kind of routine reservation that should never have required so much effort to find. But before he went upstairs, Nathan quietly asked to meet with the hotel's general manager. Not because he was furious, though he had every right to be, but because he had always believed that patterns should be understood before they are corrected. The general manager, a composed man named Daniel Ramirez, appeared within minutes, apologetic and visibly alarmed the moment he saw the name on the check-in screen. He had worked for Nathan's company for 6 years, had met Nathan exactly twice at regional meetings, and clearly had not expected to encounter his employer standing exhausted and rumpled in his own lobby with a sleeping child and a bouquet of roses. "Mr. Whitmore," Daniel said, "I had no idea you were here. I am terribly sorry about the confusion at the desk. I will look into this immediately." Nathan raised a hand gently. "I would like to talk with you about what just happened," he said. "Not as an executive correcting employees, but simply as a guest who was treated with unnecessary coldness for no reason except the way I looked when I came in." He told Daniel plainly, without exaggeration, what had occurred: the dismissive attitude, the unwillingness to check twice, the suggestion that he simply go somewhere else instead of someone taking a few extra seconds to search properly. Then he told him about Rosa, about the vase, and about the kindness that cost her nothing but meant almost everything in that tired moment. "I am not asking you to fire anyone out of anger," Nathan said. "I am asking you to think about what kind of hotel we are actually running if the woman folding linens understands hospitality better than the people standing behind the front desk." Daniel Ramirez eventually dismissed Ashley and Morgan. Not as an act of cruelty, and not that same night, but after a careful review the following week confirmed what Nathan had already suspected. It had not been a single mistake. It was a pattern, recorded in more than one previous guest complaint that had been quietly absorbed and forgotten, the way small acts of unkindness often are when no one important enough happens to be there to witness them. In the end, the firings were not what mattered. Nathan took no pleasure in them. He had built his company on the belief that people usually rise to the standard they are shown. In some personal way, he felt that part of the responsibility belonged to the systems that had allowed 2 employees to treat a tired father so carelessly, and apparently for long enough that it had become routine. What mattered far more to him, and what he thought about much more often in the week that followed, was Rosa. He found her 2 days later, before he checked out, in a small break room behind the housekeeping office. She was eating a sandwich during her short lunch break. "Rosa," he said softly, knocking on the open door, "do you have a minute?" She looked up, surprised to see him, and immediately began to stand, smoothing her vest. "Mr. Whitmore, I didn't know." "Please," he said. "Stay seated. I only wanted to thank you properly for the other night." She sat back down, looking slightly embarrassed, the way kind people often do when their kindness is noticed and named directly. "It was nothing," she said. "I just don't like seeing people treated that way, especially a father traveling alone with a little girl. I raised 3 children by myself after my husband died. I know what that kind of exhaustion looks like." Nathan nodded slowly. "I didn't know that," he said. "Most people don't ask," Rosa replied, not bitterly, just as a fact about the way such things usually go. He sat across from her. "I would like to ask you something," he said. "I am restructuring our regional training program, the one that teaches new staff what hospitality actually means beyond a script. I think you would be very good at helping build it. In fact, I think you would do better than most of the people currently responsible for it."
Rosa blinked.
"I clean rooms, Mr. Whitmore. I'm not a trainer." "You saw a tired man, a sleeping child, and a bent flower stem," Nathan said. And you took care of all three without being asked, in about 90 seconds, while two trained front desk employees stood a few feet away and saw nothing at all. That is not a small skill. That is the entire skill. I would like to pay you properly to teach it to other people." Rosa agreed after several days of careful thought and one long phone call with her oldest daughter, who told her in very clear terms that she would be foolish to turn down what was being offered. Within a year, Rosa became the Regional Guest Experience Training Coordinator for all 7 of Nathan's properties. It was a position that had not existed before that November evening, created specifically around what she had already been quietly doing for years without a title and without recognition. On the wall of her office hung a small framed photograph. It was not a picture of a hotel or an award. It was a simple glass vase holding a bouquet of slightly crushed red roses, which Nathan had sent to her with a card 1 week after the anniversary of Lily's mother's death had passed. The card said only, "Thank you for seeing us when it would have been so easy not to." As for Lily, she remembered very little about that specific evening. After all, she had slept through most of it, and children preserve memory selectively, holding on to warmth while letting details fade. But she did remember, vaguely, in the way small children remember important things without understanding why they matter, the kind woman with silver in her hair who fixed a flower for her father and smiled at her for a moment while she pretended to still be asleep against his shoulder. Years later, when Lily was older and had begun to understand more fully what kind of man her father was, the quiet, unannounced way he moved through the world, checking what mattered instead of simply trusting the reports that landed on his desk, she once asked him why that particular evening had stayed so clearly in his memory out of all the nights he had spent traveling. Nathan answered simply. He told her it was the night he learned again what he had always believed, but had needed to be reminded of. Kindness rarely announces itself with fanfare. It arrives quietly, in the moment someone notices a bent flower stem, or the tired slope of a person's shoulders, or a sleeping child who deserves a bed instead of a lobby chair. And the people who offer that kindness without a title, without expectation, and without reward are often the people who deserve, more than anyone else in the room, to be truly seen. Perhaps that is what stays with us longest after a night like that. Not the coldness, because coldness fades faster than we think, but the quiet decency of someone who simply chose to look a little closer. We do not always know, when we walk through a door exhausted and worn down by the road, who will see us clearly and who will not. But it is worth remembering that the kindness we receive in our hardest, most ordinary moments, freely given by someone who expects nothing in return, is very often the thing we carry with us long after the rest of the evening has disappeared.